Aloha. This is the legislative update for January 23rd, 2015. The agenda today is going to be covering two areas: HPCSN's bills for the 2015 legislative session and the initial HPCSN read on charter school funding per pupil for school year 15-16. HPCSN bills. So the first bill that we will be asking legislators to introduce is a collective bargaining bill. This bill proposes to do mainly three things. Number one, it sets up a new employer group to negotiate a charter school master agreement. So what this employer group is, it's a in the collective bargaining process, there's an employer group and then the employee group, which is basically the HSTA or HGA or UPW. The employer side usually represents the state, or it does represent the state. In this case, what it would break down to is 3 votes by the governor, 1 vote for the BOE, and 2 votes, 1 each, for charter school representatives. And how this plays out is that the whole of charter schools, so all charter school governing boards, will vote to select 2 representatives, and both of those representatives will have 1 vote each in the collective bargaining process. Then what it does is it actually also preserves the option for schools to negotiate a supplemental off of the DOE master agreement. So what we're envisioning here is that a school, even though they're voting for these representatives, will have a choice to go one way, which is the charter school master agreement. And if they don't choose to do the charter school master agreement, they can opt to do what charter schools do now, which is negotiate a supplemental off of the master agreement. Those will be the only 2 options. Therefore, if you wanted to just be on the DOE master agreement, that would not be an option in this case. And of course, this bill was brought up through discussions like how can we be, if we're not going to be getting the additional thousands of dollars per pupil, how might we be more effective with the money that we do have by giving the flexibility to schools or maximizing the flexibility for schools to do some decision making at the school level with its employees. So this particular charter school master agreement option is the ability to come together as multiple governing boards, because some governing boards, don't have the capacity to really do the negotiating for their school, coming together, being efficient in that way, as well as making these agreements be the floor of operations for charter schools that that the HSTA won't be very flexible with, whether it's the amount of pay per hour, but then you'll have some flexibilities in other areas. And we hope that that would be a floor for charter schools and not necessarily, doing nitpicking, I guess, if you want to say that. So that's the collective bargaining bill. What we will be doing is asking each of the schools to feed back, and we are putting together testimony, and we'll be sharing it before the bills are heard in committee. Oh, let me just go back and say that the collective bargaining bill, we spoke to both labor chairs in the House and the Senate, and as far as we understand, both are agreeable to being co-introducers or primary introducers on this bill. So far, we also do have Senator Kidani, my apologies, Senator Kidani, that has agreed to be a primary introducer for both this collective bargaining bill and the next bill that we're talking about now is the Facilities Funding and Support Bill. This Facilities and Funding Support Bill proposes to, number one, establish a charter school facilities funding working group. There's been a lot of hesitation regarding facilities funding. As you know, it's taken a really long time to just get this on the table for discussion. Last year, there were 2 bills that made it to conference committee, which is at the tail end of approving a bill, which has brought a lot of awareness, broad awareness of facilities funding. Legislators are very hesitant. They have questions like, are we proposing to fund, with general funds, which is difficult to do, on properties that are not owned by the state? What happens if a school closes down? What are the rights of the state to that property? A lot of other questions that don't fit their normal way of doing facilities funding in the state of Hawaii and with government buildings and with government agencies. They also have concerns about procurement and other things like concerns about around, okay, who's going to be managing these buildings, like the DOE has its facility management area of DOE. So all of these questions still pop up, and that's what usually makes it tough in the end to get a bill passed, or this facilities bill passed. So what we've tried to do is create a bill that would make them more comfortable to pass. Some of the other, especially in the latest informational briefing, some of the questions came around, well, how do charter schools expect us to fund things when, the system doesn't have a safeguard for when charter school governing boards aren't exercising their responsibility and their obligation to the state. And they were referring to the Halal Lokahi situation, where they, are falling short mid-year, and fell short mid-year last year. Of course, we've got some work to do in that area, but when you're speaking to the general public, you get a lot of head nods, or in the room, you get a lot of head nods of yes, there needs to be some kind of, oversight of these funds. So what we're hoping to do is bring that conversation more into the hands of people who will pay attention and focus in on how to disperse funds better. There are 3 major things that the facilities support working group would do, and that would be to set up criteria, or actually the commission is asked to set up the criteria, but then the working group decides the priorities and who gets the money. The criteria is broken down into these 3 areas to try to address some of the concerns that the legislators have. One of them would be needs. What are the needs out there? And the performance of the school, as well as risk and recourse for the state. So those are some of the criteria that the commission sets up, and then the working group will prioritize funding or allocate funding to individual schools through the working group. It also, aside from establishing and having the working group do what I just mentioned, it makes appropriating general obligation bonds and general funds by legislators an annual process. Hopefully this will be easier to change the mindsets of legislators as facilities as an obligation of the state for charter schools. It adds a requirement for the commission to report on facilities funds that get distributed, what the status is, how much, that sort of thing. It adds the right of first refusal. This was an idea of Kidani, Senator Kidani. Adds the right of first refusal for charter schools of all vacant state facilities, not in the just in the DOE. So currently, in statute, that opportunity is there for charter schools for DOE property. It's a little bit different when the language is implemented. However, it does state that in the DOE, and Senator Kidani was really favorable, and this was her idea to add it to the bill as well. It also adds a section for, because if this bill is to pass, it would not be, there would be no money in it for school year 15-16. So what this bill does is it also adds sections to a blank appropriations for general funds and general obligations funds. And the reason why we don't put any money in there is because it will ultimately, on a year-to-year basis, be up to the legislature to deem what is appropriate or necessary, or their idea of how much charter schools would be funded through this working group, through the commission dispersed by this or allocated by this working group. So I'm going to jump over to charter school funding. Keep in mind that this is my review of the budget numbers, looking at the governor's budget that he submitted for the biennium, as well as having conversations with both the commission and Leila Shar, the financial performance manager, as well as talking to DOE folks. And it's a pretty convoluted process. We do have a very clear calculation, but just because we have a calculation, it doesn't mean that all the numbers throughout the different variations of the budget process, that we're all on the same page as to the parts of the calculation. So this is my my read of the budget numbers after, again, talking to some people in DOE, talking to the commission, as well as examining the governor's budget that he submitted to the legislature. Okay, I hope you can see this. This is a breakdown that we pulled from the governor's budget, and I do have some additional comments that after doing some research and investigation. The way that the charter school budget is put together is we take all the general funds in the different cost categories and add them up. So and in this spreadsheet you'll have, I'll make this available through email, and it goes through explaining EDN 100, what's in it, EDN 150, what's in it, 200, 300. There's 500 that we don't have access to. So of these different amounts, EDN 100 to EDN 500, we do not, in our calculation for charter school funding, we do not get EDN 150 because that's special education programs. The money is completely managed through the DOE because in statute it says that the DOE is responsible for all special education. So charter schools do get support through this, just like all the rest of the schools do. Of course, there's always that, whether we have enough of the support from the DOE is another question. EDN 500 is taken out of our calculation because it provides a plus after school program, as well as the adult community services, adult education, and legislators felt that that was not something that should be in the charter schools per pupil. Per pupil. So the way that we do this is we don't include EDN 150 and we don't include EDN 500, and we just add up all of the general funds, those are state funds, all of the general funds for the year. We get this 1.1 plus $1 billion. And in the governor's report, budget report, it shows the breakdown of K through 6, 7th and 8th, 9th and 12th. And adding up all of these amounts, the total students that I can see is 173,944. So the way that we do this calculation is we divide the total general fund appropriations in these cost categories by the amount of students. And that, because we've estimated, or the commission has estimated, that the count will be 10,440, and if we divide the total amount of general funds in our calculation by the amount of students in the DOE system, we get $6,603.67 for school year 15-16. The one thing to note is this increase, although it may look, oh, you know, great, it also includes the collective bargaining. I wouldn't say great, but it also includes the collective bargaining raises. So at one point in time, the collective bargaining raises in the last, I think, couple years was funded outside of the per pupil or outside of the normal cost categories for the Department of Education. These numbers reflect collective bargaining raises for all of your employees within this per pupil number. So let's talk about the additional information outside of the governor's budget that is that provides some updates to from when he submitted, or Governor Ige submitted the budget to the legislature till now. So one of the updates is that the governor had sent a message to the Department of Education that he'll be adding another $26 million in funding. And then there was a second message for another $9 million. Now, although we don't know if it's if those additions are in these areas, if we were to anticipate that they are, the total amount new that the governor is seeking from the legislature to fund education, or the DOE's education budget, is $35 million. And when I take that and divide that up by the amount of students that exist in the DOE system, then I get an additional $201 to the per pupil. So potentially, and of course, you know, don't hold me to this because it changes throughout the legislative session, and that's why we'll have these weekly updates. But supposedly, and from what I can see, the per pupil right now is targeted by the, or has been submitted by the governor to be around 6,800. You know, I'm not sure what that means for additional money for each school, because collective bargaining increases is a big amount. Okay, so let's take a look at some other further calculations. So when I take a look at this, the 2.1 million, I found out from Layla that the budget is 2.1 million for the commission, that the schools no longer are obligated to pay. Not even obligated, they won't pay because the state is going to be funding the commission. When we look at that, the operating, when we look at that, we have it broken down to general funds of 73 million and federal funds of 2 million. I am more familiar with this part of the calculation, which is general funds. So when we take this 73 million and we minus out the per pupil that we're anticipating, if it gets past the 68 million, we have a difference of 4.4 million. The commission's office being paid the 2.1 million leaves an unknown of 2.3 million. I don't quite know what that is. The governor has not made any indications, or I don't know if it's a mistake or what. But I just wanted to, you know, have you guys know that there might be more money in there that the legislature might find, you know, might not agree with the governor, because I'm not sure where this 2.3 million comes from. Okay, that covers the initial overview of the governor's budget, and I hope that, remember, don't hold me to it. This process is ever changing. It's convoluted. Sometimes, you know, not everyone is on the same page, but I'm hoping to give, you know, all of you at least a starting point of understanding what the per pupil might look like for next year. So if you have any questions, just let me know. Give me an email is always best during this, you know, legislative time, because it just gets so busy, and I'm running from meeting to meeting. But yeah, definitely email me. You have my cell number. It's 808-741-5966. If you text me, sometimes that's quicker. If it's a short answer, I can get back to you really quickly. What we're hoping to do for the remainder of the session is just have an opportunity to talk with members every Friday at 12 noon, and that will help us to just stay in touch, and so that you can tell me when I've done, you know, when we're either testifying or proposing changes, that we hopefully will be able to get feedback from you, and you'd be able to ask some questions for clarification, and I can better represent you in this legislative process as to how these things will affect each individual school. Okay, so in the email there is a registration link for webinars, and these weekly webinars will have the same login information each time to hopefully make it easier and scheduled out throughout the whole session. Thank you once again for joining this update, and next week we'll do it again, and hopefully as time goes on we'll be able to adjust the time shorter for times when the update, you know, may not be very lengthy, and then other times where we can go maybe up to an hour of discussion on any particular, you know, complicated issues, or you know, needing more feedback. So we're going to try to be as flexible as possible. Thank you very much again for joining us, and please be engaged this legislative session. Aloha.